Hi, everybody. We have begun last week, chapter 35, and we stopped in the middle of the topic. So I want just to refresh your mind. The topic of chapter 35 is, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of my life? What am I achieving? At the end of my life, what am I going with? Chapter 36 is going to be about the purpose of the creation of the universe. Why is there a universe? The macro. Chapter 38 is going to be why in this universe action counts more than anything else. But let's go back to 35. So we discovered the first question, as I shared with you, is what am I doing here if at the end of the day, only someone who is created by God as a tzaddik will have no child?
The way it is designed.
No matter what.
You, the patient, are.
No matter what, we will have the challenge over and over and over. So let's say today I keep kosher, I ate kosher. The challenge of keeping kosher tomorrow is the same as today. If I keep Shabbat today, this Shabbat, next Shabbat, I'll have the challenge. So it ends up that at the end of my life, I'm not necessarily much better than the way when I came. I showed you the story of the thief who slid in through the chimney. And the rabbi is studying Kodem, so he says to the rabbi, I have two questions. What am I doing here and how I get out of here? In other words, what am I doing here? And how do I get out? You know, there is a machloket, there is an argument in the Gemara, if it's beneficial for men to be created. Hillel says it is, Shammai says it's not. It's one of the very rare time that the rabbis ruled in favor of Hillel, meaning it's better for men not to be created. Now, the Rebbe explains it differently, and we don't have the time to explain it, so I don't want to. But the way I see it in a simple matter is we end up with more damaged good than the way we came. Because no matter how good we are, we have gone through so much in and out and back and forth, good and evil, that it's not necessarily that good is on the scale, is heavier on the scale. And that's what the rabbi is asking. In addition, a tzaddik, he has no challenge, so he's clean slate. He's always going to desire studying Torah. He will never gossip. He will never lie. He'll always be in peace with everybody. Everybody loves him, and he spends all his time serving God. But the rest of us, the rest of society, 99.99999%, are not to be created, were not created as tzaddiks, and therefore, no matter what, even a Benoni who will never succumb to his evil desire is always going to be challenged, and the challenge is very great. The rabbi began to explain with a parable, and it's, to me, I think I told you last week, it is the essence of life. The rabbi says that the human being is compared with a candle. The candle possesses three components: the oil that feeds the flame, the wick, and the flame. The flame that is held by the wick and is fed by the oil. Without oil, the flame will be gone, will vanish. Without the wick, it has nothing to be holding on to. Which one of the three is the most important? I shared it very clearly. It's a flame. The reason is because flame provide heat, provide light. The flame is godliness. Godliness. The wick is my body that holds godliness in the universe. And the oil is the mitzvot and the study of Torah where I serve God. That's what is going to get consumed by the flame. Just like the flame cannot be lit unless it kept being fed and the material has to be consumed by it. So his godliness will be only when there are continuously good deeds. So the more good deeds I perform, the greater the flame. More lights in the room, more light, bigger, brighter, and hotter the room is. And the rabbi goes on to a lengthy discussion, and he will continue in this week. Why is the neshama not the oil? Why shouldn't the neshama feed the light? And the rabbi explains, and the rabbi is going to go to explain, is that the material that can hold flame is only material that can get completely consumed by the flame. Oil, the quality of oil is that it gets consumed and gone, because the flame is energy that has taken the oil as energy, converted to energy, and now you have light. That's why if you have a big piece of wood, the flame cannot get cut into it. What do? You chop it into small pieces so it can get consumed. What happens when the fire is gone, when there is no more fire? You look at the wood is gone, there is nothing left. If the neshama will dare to feed the flame, the neshama will be gone. That's number one. But the rabbi is going to go into a different route. And the rabbi is going to tell us that no matter how holy the neshama, this is going to be, sounds esoteric, but it's very powerful because it has impact on many areas of our life. The neshama is not fully nullified before God. Therefore, it can never be consumed by the flame. When I do a good deed, when I eat kosher because God said so, and more so when it makes no sense, because then I show that I'm totally submersed myself into godliness. The neshama can be very refined, can be an extension or part of God, but it's not completely nullified. When a lady lights Shabbat candles at the onset of Shabbat, when a man recites Kiddush on Friday night, what we do is we do a mitzvah which is 100% nullified and connected to God. And the rabbi will bother a lengthy discussion and to bring us not only in the human but in the universes. And I'm sharing with you an introduction so you can read it because it's very, the Rebbe added, so the first is the Rebbe is going to go through and say that there are many holy souls. No matter how holy the soul is a separate entity. That's why the soul loves God, fears God. In other words, you have to exist in order for you to love somebody. If you're non-existing, there is no way, nobody is loving anybody. And the Rebbe goes on about the universes. We have, I was debating whether we should read that text, but we're going to do it very quick. And the summary of it, the rabbi is going to say, anyone knows that there is different terminologies into godliness. One of them is the 10 attributes. There are 10 attributes by which God created and comes to the universe. Which is the first one? Anybody? From the 10. Which one of the 10 attributes? Kindness is the fourth. Chokhmah. We studied Chokhmah. Boker Tov Eliyahu. What is Chokhmah? Complete nullification. Koach ma, a power of nothingness. Remember we studied the Chokhmah and Bina? Right? Why Chokhmah is the gateway to any creation? Because in order for the universe to be created from God, an extension of God, it had to go through a process of total nullification, and then something new can be created. In other words, if I want to connect to God, there has to be total nullification. That nullification does not exist even with a lofty object or entity like the soul. It can only be done with a mitzvah that I perform with my hands and feet, or I speak Torah study with my mouth, or I use my brains. And therefore, that's the only one that can create a flame. And not only that, it affects the neshama and the guf. The body and the soul are affected by good deeds, and we'll discover that in great details later on in the class. That's why, and this idea of total nullification is so important, that in order for us to create a relationship with God, we need to be there with a total non-existing. And that can only happen through the mitzvot, performing of the mitzvot. I'm going to use an example, and then I'm going to show you other examples in the Torah. An example is a marriage. When you go for marriage, anybody watch marriage, blind marriage? What do you call it? It has already, I saw 17 seasons. A marriage one day, it's a couple that is matched to get married. No. Blind marriage?
Blind date?
Bachelorette.
What's the name?
Bachelor.
Not Bachelorette. I don't know Bachelorette. Marriage at first sight. Anybody heard of marriage at first sight?
Yes.
So don't.
They meet before they.
But the idea of marriage at first sight is there are professionals, psychologists, and marriage counselors. They find a couple, singles, and they match them based on lots of questioning and interviews, etc. What's intrigued me the most is under the chuppah, when they get married, under the marriage canopy, or when they get married, they each read their vows, and the vows are so beautiful. I will give my life. I will always be there when you open your eyes. It's just, and then you move to the last episode, and they are punching each other in the face. And they didn't know what they did when they matched. They actually, not the professionals, not the bride, not the groom. It's just horrendous. But thank God you have in record what they said. And you look at what they said and what's real. It's just unfathomable. The idea is in marriage, they are lacking one component. And that is bitul, nullification. Put the other person before my needs. Don't just say why they match me. What did they find when I gave them the list? They always go back to the list that they provided. Did I get the list? Did they give me the list? And that becomes, you see that it's always they put themselves first, naturally, we all do. And then they see if the partner was matched correctly, or if the partner is serving me, but the idea of marriage, when I got married, the idea of marriage, it was that you put the other person first. So you say, did I match that person? Am I meeting the other person's needs? When you have total nullification, what happens is, I'm no perfect, but Baruch Hashem, I enjoy a good marriage, is that there is going to be a connection. To establish a connection, a true connection, you must be totally nullified. That's why the mitzvah, a good deed, when I do because I'm tired and it's expensive, but that's what God wants, that connects me to God. I want to show you some examples.
Rabbi, can I say something?
Sure, but to the topic, please.
Rabbi Lance Friedman says, don't say to your spouse, I love you, say, you, I love.
You, I love. Okay, thank you. Good point. So there are a few points I wanted to share in this regard that will come to play in the details of the text. There is a famous story, there are a few famous stories and parables. One of them is when a king not wears his crown. Where do they hang the crown?
His throne on the side. His throne.
Can we say on a hook? On a hook. There is a hook against things sticking out of the wall and he's hanging the crown. Wouldn't it be more respectful to have a servant to sit next to him and wear the crown where he's not wearing the crown? Why don't they appoint someone to wear the crown when the king not uses it? And the reason is because no matter what human being you're going to appoint, is not completely nullified, is a separate entity. And it can cause someone to think, even for a moment, that they are in control, they wear the crown. The hook, there is no doubt who is the king. That's why they would find the hook, or whichever object it might be. Because in order for us to establish a true communication to God, there has to be, if I want to be a house for God, I need to be totally nullified. And this establishes simply by action, not by speech. Just I told you, by marriage at first sight, they will deliver such beautiful speeches, but they have nothing to do with reality. It's all about action. The Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Lubavitcher Rebbe, once turned to a man and he says, I would like you to be the shoichet, the ritual slaughterer in a certain community. And the man, being a very Hasidic, God-fearing man, turned to the Rebbe and says, I fear I will not do a good job. So I don't feel comfortable. Why don't you appoint someone else? And the Rebbe turned to him and he says, so who do you want me to appoint? Someone who is certain that he's doing a good job? What the rabbi is telling him, that the one that's feeding the job is a God-fearing person who questions constantly whether he is done properly, is performed properly. When you have someone who's certain and say, I'm qualified, I know how to do it, and I'm sure I'll do it right, that's the first disqualification. That's the first thing to say, you should not be at that position. Because God-fearing, when you have someone to the position of a God-fearing craftsmanship, you need to have someone who continuously question whether they're doing a good job. And the examples go on and on and on. King Saul was appointed king by God, the first Jewish king ever appointed. Anybody knows how long he lasted? 2 years. 2 years. Half of the book of Samuel is about King Saul. He only lasted for 2 years. But when King Saul was ordered by God to wipe out Amalekites, he had mercy on Agag, the king, and the animals, and I think the women too. I'm sorry, just the king and the animals. Why? Because he wanted to use the animals as offerings to God. Samuel, the prophet, comes to him and says, God is so angry that he tears away the kingdom from you. He's given it to you, arch enemy. And Saul said, why? I wanted to serve God, to use the animals for an offering on the altar. And Samuel says, it's far greater to obey God's command than to bring 1,000 fat cows as offerings to God. In other words, what he's saying to him, that the reason he lost his kingdom is because he lacked the most basic of nullification, which is follow the instructions. So when I put on tefillin, and I put it exactly the way God wants me, 4, not 5, I am serving God to the utmost possibility, and I am having a bond with God that my neshama cannot get. So the full consumption, the oil, the fuel that get consumed by the flame is action, not my soul. Now we understand why, and the Rebbe is going to go through, we're going to read it now, that the neshama, no matter how lofty, will never come close to being consumed by the flame because it's not totally nullified. If it's not totally nullified, just like King Saul, there is a rift between the soul and God. There is a famous Chassid who passed away about 3 years ago by the name of Rabbi Yoel Kahan. Rabbi Yoel was a master teacher for many students, Chabad Yeshiva students. I was a student. I heard from him many times. His uniqueness was that he had a brilliant memory. He would see that the Rebbe's Verbringen that lasted hours and hours and hours, and after Shabbat, he can repeat the Rebbe's words verbatim. And there is no pausing, and there is no, excuse me, I just forgot about something, was scratching, I didn't pay attention. Some Verbringens lasted 6 hours, and there was no recording. It's Shabbat, you're not allowed to record. So after Shabbat, there are famous photos, there are a lot of photos as he's sitting surrounded by Yeshiva boys, and they put a tape recorder, and he starts repeating what the Rebbe would say word by word for 6 hours. He repeats every word the Rebbe says. Not a summary, not that's what the Rebbe meant, not what the Rebbe was repeating himself. You just say every single word the Rebbe said. One time somebody asked him, how are you able to do it without exception? Because he did not miss, not maybe one or twice he missed in the summer from Bringen, but he came to Brooklyn in 1950, just as the previous Rebbe passed away. He was on a ship bound from Israel to United States. So he was in all the Rebbe's Verbringens, and he recorded everything. This is only one part of his achievements. He had done a lot more. And he says, the only way I am able to remember everything is before the Verbringen, before the beginning of the Rebbe's talk, I empty my head off. And I say to myself, you're a little child who knows nothing, studied nothing, have heard nothing. Everything you're going to hear, you hear for the first time. He says, with that emptiness mindset, I come into the Verbringen. And when the Rebbe starts speaking, all I do is listen as if I never heard, even though you heard the Rebbe say the same thing 30 times, or maybe 100 times, because there are things the Rebbe repeat himself, announcing certain dates. There's always, but he would never deviate because he was able to empty his mind. So there is no such thing I heard it. There's no such thing my father told me. There's no such thing I can argue. There is no room for it. That's called that's to me an example of self-nullification. Therefore, he is able to feel and connect to the Rebbe on a much greater level, much deeper level than normal. And now we can go to some reading. We are on page 470. I'm going to read from the top of the page. In the Alter Rebbe's words, for the soul of man, even if he be perfect tzaddik, who serves God with fear and with pleasurable love, that is, his love consists of delighting in the experience of godliness, a most lofty form of love, is nevertheless not utterly nullified out of existence so that it might be dissolved into and absorbed within God's light to be merged with it in perfect unity. It is rather a separate entity. The soul is a separate entity which fears God and loves him, since it is not absorbed within godliness, as oil is absorbed within a flame. The soul cannot serve as oil for the light of the Shekhinah, just as I explained to you until now. Not so with mitzvot and good deeds. Good deeds, which are God's will, each commandment representing God's desire that a particular act be performed. Now, God's will is the source of life for all the worlds and the creatures. They live only because God so desires. The difference between the divine will expressed in mitzvot and that same will as expressed in creation lies in the latter's descending to them by means of many contractions, tzimtzumim, and by concealment of the countenance, that is, the internal aspect of the supernal will, with only the external superficial aspect of God's will expressing itself in creation and through a descent from level to level. What the Rabbi is saying is that when God created the universe. He also wanted the universe. But that creation, that desire is an external desire. The essence, the internal desire is the mitzvot. I think that a good example here would be in place, and I showed that example on many occasions. Why are we going to work? We're going to work to earn a living, to make money, right? Why do I have to make money? So some people say they want to have a big fat bank account. We have some people, we call it addiction. Most people want it so they can go on vacation and pay the bills, right? To enjoy a comfortable, cushioned life. So what's my real desire? If I told you I like to go to work, what's my real desire? My real desire is the money. For some other more refined people, my real desire is to pay the bills and enjoy life. But definitely my desire to go to work is an external desire. You know why? I asked some people over here, maybe last week. So everybody shouted, I had to prepare for retirement. Was it here? On Shabbat morning, we had that. Retirement came up, right, Harry? Okay. In other words, the reason I will go to, if I can retire with a boatload of cash, I'm not going to say I'm like to go to work because, because the work is a means to an end, right? We call it an external desire, unless people are addicted. There are some work addicts, right? But normally, most people go to work because they say they enjoy going to work or they want to go to work, of course. But that's not the end result. That's not the ultimate reason. The reason is so they can make a living, so they can pay the bills, so they can enjoy going on a cruise. That's the way life works. That's why on Shabbat we had a discussion, and it says, "What's your ultimate desire?" And half the class shouted to be retired, to retire. In other words, if I can retire and still have a nice bank account that covers all my expenses till 180, I'll be very happy. So we have a desire. That desire is external, and then we have a desire that's the ultimate. God's ultimate desire, we're going to talk in chapter 36 about the purpose of the universe, but God's ultimate desire is for me to connect to God, to create a flame, to create oil or fuel to ignite the flame so God will be bright. So the reason God created the universe is so there should be a flame somewhere. That's an external desire. And the essence of the desire is the flame to be shining brightly. So that's what the Rabbi says, even though the universe was created by God's will, but that will is an external compared to the real desire of God. All these steps were necessary so that it would be possible for the worlds to be and creatures to come into being and to be created ex nihilo as separate entities without becoming nullified out of existence, as mentioned above. The Rabbi, we talked about many concealment and far away from God, so they can be as entities on their own. Without the previously enumerated forms of concealment of godliness, all created beings will be so completely nullified before the divine will that created them that they would have no independent identity. Thus, the divine will expressed in the creation can come about only through its seeming contraction, occultation, and descent. That's why it has to go through many stages. That was God's will, that there will be a separate entity from God. The mitzvot, in other words, go back to neshama. Neshama is God's will, but that's not the essence. It's something that is separated from God because it's a means to an end, to perform, to serve God. The mitzvot, on the other hand, are the internal aspect of the divine will. There, the countenance is not hidden at all, for on the contrary, mitzvot are the underlying purpose of the inner aspect of will of creation in its entirety. To illustrate by way of example. In other words, this is so powerful because actually it answers the question that we asked at the beginning. In order for me to provide fuel or energy to ignite the flame, I don't need to be a holy tzaddik. I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to be a spiritual person. All I have to do is do what God say. Last week towards the end of class, I showed you the comparison between two people. A teenager that wants to borrow the car, and his father says, "I'll give you the car if you stay for the seder and eat half a matzah." And another man in Siberia who is a righteous man who was taken away from family and community, and he's crying that he could not fulfill the mitzvah on the seder night by eating matzah. Which one of them served God? The child who despises and curses his father and despises matzah, and he can't wait to go out, or the older man who is crying the whole night, "I couldn't have matzah." The answer is the teenager, because he ate matzah. It doesn't matter what the motives. We will talk about the motives later on, but right now we need to know that action is the fuel that ignite or brighten the flame. To illustrate by way of example, I think I showed you the example. One engages in business so that he will realize profit and thereby support his family. In all, he wants the business to prosper, wants the profits, and wants to provide for his family. Yet his true inner will lies only in supporting his family. His desire for profit is merely incidental, external to this will, and his desire for business even more so. So too with divine will, as expressed in creation and as expressed in the mitzvot. The desire for creation is an external will. It is generated by the inner, that is the ultimate desire that Jews observe the mitzvot, obviously an impossibility without a created world. And therefore, because the mitzvot represent God's true inner will, and because in them there is no concealment of this will, unlike the case of in creation, therefore, the godly life force within them is by no means a separate entity, but is united with and contained within God's will, and they, the mitzvot, are truly joined in perfect unity with God's will. Therefore, the closest, the greatest bond with God is by performing the mitzvot, because God's will did not go through all the concealments and contractions before it came to the universe. The universe, my neshama, all had to go through many, many, many contractions, a lot of concealments, a lot of changes. By the time it reaches here, it's totally separated and removed from God, even the neshama. My mitzvah, when I keep Shabbat, when I walk to synagogue, when I study Torah, I am connecting with God's desire and I'm creating. That's therefore, it is only way to provide oil or energy for the flame to exist. The rabbi is going to talk about which part of me connects to God when I perform the mitzvot or when I study Torah. The neshama or the body? What do you think? The neshama or the body? The neshama. Anybody else? Okay. So the rabbi is going to teach us something totally new, and I think it's a revelation. The rabbi is saying that if I study Torah, which faculty connects to God? The intelligent. Study Torah referring to not just reading text, but understanding the text and trying to comprehend God's desire in the Torah. Whenever I study Torah, I actually connect with the spiritual powers of my existence, which is the neshama. However, when I perform a mitzvah with my body, I walk to synagogue, I eat kosher. What I do is I make the light or godliness to enter into my body. So my body is refined only through a mitzvah. The body is affected. And I have a story for you. I didn't show.
The soul is refined through study, but the body is refined through.
Exactly. That's why from the two, which one? The Gemara has a debate. Talmud Gadol or Maaseh Gadol? Study is greater or mitzvot is greater? What does the Talmud answer? Talmud Gadol shemevi lidei Maaseh. It's greater to study, provided it will enhance your action. It will teach you how to do right. In other words, at the end of the day, both of them are equally as powerful. But what refines my body is the mitzvot. What refines my soul is the study of Torah. And I have a story with you. What I read recently, that story, I used to have a whole different understanding of the story, but one time there was a couple who were thrown into a dungeon because they didn't pay the rent of their bar or the tavern that they rented. And in order for them to be released, there was a ransom. They had to pay the rent that they owed. So the Maggid of Mezrich, the Mezrich Maggid, assigned two students, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, and Reb Levi Yitzchok of Berdichev, another student of the Mezrich Maggid, and he asked him to go around collecting funds, to knock on doors, as was done, and say, I need help, Pidyon Shvuim, to remove someone from captivity. So the Alter Rebbe turned to the Mezrich Maggid and he says, I'm willing to go on some conditions. The first is, I will go collecting on the condition that I decide from who we take, in other words, well, to which persons we go, and also what amount. Those days, the rabbi can tell a member of the community, I need you to give so much, and the member cannot argue. So the Alter Rebbe says, that's why you're so happy you are living in this day and age. Huh? My father, he never spoke about it, but I knew they built a section in the yeshiva in Kfar Chabad. They expanded the yeshiva, and they needed funds. In Israel, money was very scarce, much worse than here. My father was a very young man at the time, and the head of the yeshiva of all Israel, all the yeshivas, appointed my father and an elder person to go around knocking on doors to make, there was no phone call, telephone. So after evening service, all the men usually are at home for dinner, taking care of the kids. They would knock on the door and say, we need to talk. And when they come to talk, the head of the yeshiva would told my father and this elder, he came from Russia, a very, very old man, he was my teacher. He said to them, you go and you ask for 1,000 lira. 1,000 lira is like asking today $18,000. And the people couldn't make ends meet. And they were going for Social Security. They were going for support from the government to pay for food for their children. But my father and that elder say, this is what you need to. They went to most of this, and you have to, you can't do it, make a pledge and start paying it. It will take 25 years. Will take 25 years. But they couldn't argue, because once those two men came and they said they came from the head, so today when you enter the yeshiva, there is a big board called Magena Elef, the shield of 1,000. It's a verse in the Tanakh, and there are plaques for all those who participated. So it doesn't say, but I know my father and this elder went, because you see names there of people that you know they have no money, but yes, their names appear there. And the only reason is because they respected the authority. Back to our discussion. So
Like the mafia protection.
you said the mafia learned. It goes the other way around. The mafia don't teach us, they learn from us. Good point. Back to our discussion, the Alter Rebbe and Reb Levi Yitzchok Berdichev were assigned. So the Alter Rebbe says on two conditions. One, I choose who we're going to, and I choose how much we're going to ask. And they had no choice, so they accepted. So Reb Levi Yitzchok of Berdichev, and there were a few other students later becoming rabbis, so the Alter Rebbe went. So they provided the list of all the villagers. And as they were giving the villagers, the Alter Rebbe pointed out to a very wealthy man that was known as a man who never gave. And he says, I want to go to him first. And they turned to him and says, we're wasting our time. Because he never, not even obligatory membership, he didn't pay. He didn't pay dues. He didn't do nothing. Also, he had a very strange tradition. Whenever somebody asked him, no matter how dire and how big the project was, he would get up, walk into his safe, open up his safe, and take out a small coin of a quarter and hand it to the person and says, this is my help. That's what I'm able to help. But the Alter Rebbe insisted, and they had no choice. He says that was the condition, wasn't it? So I'm part of it as long as you follow the. So they had no choice. So the entourage goes and they knock on the door. He opens up. Hi, rabbis, come on in. What can I give you? A drink to eat? And then start talking about a couple that with the children are in a dungeon. They need to be released, and we need a lot of money. And the man says, and how much do you need? And they said 3,000 rubles. 3,000 rubles like $75,000. And the man says, wow, that's very nice. Let me see what I can do. And he walks over to his safe. He opens up the safe. And he takes out in the shelf, he has a quarter. He hands it over to them. He says, here is my participation. Now, what would you do? As all people until then did, they would throw it at this man's face and walk out because that's an insult. But the Alter Rebbe took it, and everybody says, you're not taking it. It's an insult. And he says to him, thank you so much for your kindness. We really appreciate it. And walked out. On the way out, he was showered by all the students. How can you give him respect when he showed no respect? And the Alter Rebbe just kept quiet and kept walking to the next destination. Suddenly they see behind the rich man is chasing, says, excuse me, rabbis, excuse me. I found a few more shekels. Here, let me help you more. And he hands him a bill of 5 rubles. So from a quarter of a ruble. So the Alter Rebbe, they wouldn't take it because they came for the big bundles, not. But the Alter Rebbe turned to him and he says, this is so kind of you. You actually are giving twice today. This is very special. Not everybody is able to give more than once a day. So he took the 5 rubles. And again, they look at him and says, this man, for breakfast, just breakfast is 250 rubles. Why are you giving so? And the Alter Rebbe says, we made a condition. I decide how much people give, and I decide where we go to. Let's continue. And as they keep going, suddenly he comes back. He runs them after them. Now he gives them 50. Then suddenly, 5 minutes later, he sees them. He gave them 100. Then he chases after them, and he says, tell me the whole amount you need. And they said 3,000 rubles. So he said, I have it here. And he gave it to them. Now, I heard the story until now that the man said that one time before someone asked him for help. Did anybody heard the story for me? Okay. So the story, the way I understood it until now, and I'll tell you what I just discovered. The story I heard until now is the man once was in synagogue and he had no money. His wallet, he gave his wallet to his daughter. And the man, somebody came and asked him for help, expecting 50 rubles, 75 rubles. And the man looked on all his pockets. He found that quarter, that's a quarter of a ruble. And he handed it to the guy, and the guy threw it in his face. And he was very offended. So he made a vow. The vow was, until someone will accept this ruble with graciousness as charity, I will not give anything else. So every time people would come, they're building a new building, they need to save a family, they need it, whatever, you would offer them the quarter. And what do? They throw it back in his face. The Alter Rebbe was the first one who accepted it. Once he accepted it, he broke the vow. He kept his vow. Now he can start helping. That's the way I knew it until now. Today, I discovered a new dimension that the Alter Rebbe said later that the only reason that he changed his heart is because he did a mitzvah with action. What happens when you do a mitzvah with action? You connect to God like nothing else. You get consumed in God's flame. Remember the fuel? So that penetrated a little small hole in his body. once that happened, he started thinking, maybe I should give more. And that's what made him want to give 5 rubles. Now it penetrated a bigger hole, breaking his stubbornness and connecting him to God in a way that his neshama can never connect. It's only the action. And later on, he gave a 3rd time and a 4th time. Each time, the opening grew bigger and bigger and bigger, when finally he opened up completely. And it's all because mitzvah goreret mitzvah. One mitzvah will make him do another mitzvah, because it is the fuel that fuels the flame, the energy that. So no, my neshama, you can talk to my neshama if you can, as much as you want. My neshama cannot get consumed by godliness, by the flame, only good deeds. Let's read a little more. I wanted to finish the chapter. It's not going to happen today, but
But we got good story.
it is thus, we are page 472. It is thus clear why in the above mentioned metaphor the mitzvot can serve as oil for the light of the Shekhinah, for they are truly absorbed within and transformed into the light of the divine will. Just as oil is absorbed within a flame, the Alter Rebbe will arrive at this conclusion after a preliminary discussion of what the Zohar means when it says that the light of Shekhinah rests on man. This exposition now follows. So the Rabbi is going to take us on a technical discussion, but it's part of Tanya. Says the Rebbe, the resting of Shekhinah means, that is, when we single out a specific object from a world filled with the Shekhinah by saying that the divine presence rests upon that object, its uniqueness lies in other words, the Rabbi is bothered. Shekhinah is everywhere. God is everywhere. Chapter 31, remember we spoke that everything is God. So what do you mean God rests upon men when they perform a mitzvah? That the flame rests on the head. Remember the Zohar says, you look at the head, you find the head, the light above the head. God is everywhere. God is on the table, God is on the chair, on the floor, God is everything. Shekhinah is everywhere. What do you mean rests above the head? Says the Rebbe, the revelation of godliness and the Ein Sof light in that particular object, meaning this means to say that this object is comprised within God's light and is nullified out of existence towards him, that is, it has no separate identity. For only then can the one God rest upon it, upon the object, and reveal himself in it. But anything not completely nullified out of existence towards the godly light cannot have God's light rest and reveal itself within it. In other words, says the Rebbe, the Shekhinah is everywhere. The question is about the level of revelation, how much it revealed. More nullification, you create more space for God. If I remove myself, remember the Rabbi says that he comes in with an empty mindset. That's when the Rebbe's words can penetrate. More emptiness, more godliness. And therefore, this is where God is more revealed than any other place. Says the Rebbe, even a perfect tzaddik who cleaves to him with abundant love, a most lofty level of love and attachment to God, even in the case of such a tzaddik, no thought can truly grasp him at all. For the true implications of the phrase, God is the true Lord, is his unity and oneness, that he alone exists, and there is absolutely nothing besides him. As explained in chapter 20, the statement God is one means not only that he is the sole God, but also that he is the only being that truly exists. All else is totally nullified before God, before him. If so, this person, that is the above-mentioned tzaddik, who loves God and who is separate being in his own self-perception, as is evident from the very fact that he loves God, rather than non-entity, no thought of his can grasp him at all. And therefore, even the tzaddik cannot grasp God and thereby become one with him through the faculty of his own soul. Therefore, God's light does not abide in or manifest itself in him except through the fulfillment of the mitzvot. which constitute his actual will and wisdom without any concealment of countenance, since the inner aspect of the divine will stands revealed only in the mitzvot. It is only by means of them that the light of the Shekhinah rests upon man, not through spiritual devotion alone. So again, as said before, as I shared with you, God is everywhere, but God is not revealed anywhere other than where God is totally nullified. Where is God nullified? When I do a mitzvah. So how does the flame get bigger? When you put more oil, the oil is consumed, totally nullified before the flame. That's when the flame grows bigger. If the fuel is not nullified before the flame has no benefit to it. It will not grow. So the mitzvot is the only place, the only ability for God to expand, to become resting, so to say, to expand or reveal itself. Not my neshama, not my body, or not anything else. The rabbi is going to say this. I'm going to read it very quick. This is the addition that the rabbi added later. This accords with what I heard from my teacher, the Maggid HaMezrich, peace upon him, and the meaning of and the reason behind the statement of Eitz Chaim that the Ein Sof light does not unite itself even with the world of Atzilut, emanation, except by first vesting itself in the attribute of Chokhmah, wisdom. Because, as I told you, wisdom is total nullification. God cannot reveal himself unless someone is totally gone. This is because the Ein Sof of the is the true one, which means that he alone exists and there is not besides him. And this, in fact, is the level of Chokhmah. The idea of Chokhmah, as we study in great length, is total nullification, and that's why it's the beginning of everything that God wants to create. Now the rabbi is going to talk about the difference between. I'm going to read a little more. The rabbi is going to talk about the difference between neshama and guf, between my soul and my body, where study of Torah connects to my soul, and the mitzvot, the performance of mitzvot, will change and affect my body. The Alter Rebbe now returns to a subject of the light of the Shekhinah, which rests upon man only through the mitzvot, which alone can serve as oil for the light. He points out that the effect of the light upon the person performing a mitzvah varies from one category of mitzvot to another. Those mitzvot performed in one's thought and speech cause the light of the Shekhinah to rest upon the divine soul alone. Drawing the light upon the body and upon the animal soul requires the performance of mitzvot, which involve action, where one harnesses the power of the animal, life-giving soul in the Alter Rebbe's words. What the Rabbi is going to say, any mitzvah performed with speech or intellect is affecting neshama, the soul. Any mitzvah that affects my action, taking, going, walking, giving, all that is affecting the body. When a person studies Torah using his power of thought and speech, his neshama, his divine soul with its two inner garments only, vis-a-vis the faculties of speech and thought. Thought is obviously the internal garments, as it is connected to the soul itself. This is why thought functions successively. It is closely bound in the soul to the soul, and the soul's presence is constant. Speech too is internal when compared with action, which acts upon objects outside the soul. We talked about it on many occasions in the early chapters. Speech is internal, thought is internal, is much deeper. It's all about the soul. Action is all about the body. Are absorbed within the light of God, the Ein Sof, blessed be He, and are merged within it in perfect unity. This constitutes the resting of the Shekhinah on His divine soul. As our sages have said, when have one performed, person applies himself diligently to Torah study, the Shekhinah is with him. Meaning it in this case that the Shekhinah rests upon his divine soul and upon its faculties of thought and speech, which are engaged in the mental and oral study of the Torah. So when one studies Torah, the connection is established to the speech and to the thought. And that connection is connecting the neshama. However, in order to draw the light and radiance of the Shekhinah upon his body and animal soul as well, that is, upon the vitalizing soul actually clothed in the body and providing for it corporal life force, one must fulfill the practical mitzvot, that is, commandment involving the faculty of action, which are performed with the body itself. In this way, the actual power of this body engaged in this act, that is, for example, when one done tefillin, it is the physical strength in his arm that impels the motions that constitute the fulfillment of the mitzvah, and therefore this body's bodily power is absorbed in the divine light and will and emerges within a perfect unity. This power of the body constitutes the third garment of the divine soul. As mentioned in chapter 4, the divine soul expresses itself in the faculty of action through performing the mitzvot. And when the faculty of action is absorbed within the divine will, then in addition to the power of the vitalizing soul actually clothed within the body, the power of that soul derived from Klipat Nuga. What the rabbi is transformed from evil to good and is actually absorbed into holiness exactly like the divine soul. Why? For it is the power of the animal soul that implements and performs the act that constitutes the mitzvah. The rabbi is teaching us a much deeper, greater level point, and that is when I do an action, not only it affects the body, it affects the animal soul, because the animal soul vitalizes the body. We study it in chapter 9. And therefore, because it is directly involved in giving energy to the body, when I lift my arm, when I move my legs, in order for me to walk towards serving God, what I do is I am connecting and becoming fuel or energy to ignite the fire, the flame of God. And therefore, the animal soul is also becoming godly and consumed by godliness to a much deeper level than the godly soul. Because the godly soul is an emanation that went through many contractions before it came to the universe. When I do action, the animal soul is totally connected to God's desire and will in a straight way without any contractions. We'll stop right here and continue next week. Be well, everybody. Bye.